One. There it is. All right. Welcome back, everybody. It is a beautiful Wednesday out here in San Diego. I hope it's a beautiful day for you all today. We have a great guest who's going to talk to us. You guys see it all around here. Splatterings and art and how it works in therapy. So this will be fun.
Practicing Polyamory, real-life perspectives from the imperfect people of polyamory. The mission of the Practicing Polyamory podcast is to provide a platform for all of the real-life, flawed humans that practice polyamory so that we might all learn from one another and grow as a community. Enjoy the show.
All right, here we go. Here we are, everybody. Thank you all, as always, for joining us today. Before we jump in the show, just 3 quick things. One more time, we did it. Woo! I'm celebrating this week. We passed that 100 YouTube subscribers mark, so you can now find us at youtube.com/practicingpoly. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch at Practicing Poly. Would love if you follow us there. And now that we've got that all covered, if you would be so kind, please leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever it is that you download the podcast. It's growing a lot. I'm really excited about it, but those reviews will help us show up even higher and higher and higher. So thank you for that. Number 2, got 2 more days until we get to interview Dr. Eli Sheff this Friday at 11 a.m. To prepare for that, please head over to bondingproject.com. Take the bonding type test to get an idea of your bonding style, because we're going to be talking about that on Friday again at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern. And lastly, to remind all of you, if you are listening to this podcast, you are a welcomed guest on the show. If you're actively polyamorous, if you're polyam curious, or if you're a professional serving the polyamorous community, I want to hear your story. Now, I added some stuff here. So if you're disabled, BIPOC, pan, bi, demi, gay, straight, sex worker, kinkster, queer, lesbian, trans, NB, ace, arrow, whatever, if I missed you, tell me and I'll add it. I want to hear your story. The more stories we hear, the more the world learns about us, the more representation we have, and the better we can serve our community. All right, that's my spiel. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get on with the show. Today's guest believes that art is an incredibly powerful form of expression, and that is why she incorporates painting and artful expression into her therapy practice. She believes that art can allow us to gain insight into ourselves that may not be obtained through talk therapy alone. Art is just another form of communication, and communication is a key to our guest, both in her relationships and in her therapy practice. She empathizes with her clients, coming from a place of understanding that therapy can be a scary leap of faith that forces us to explore ourselves, where we've been, where we are, and where we hope to go. Tune in to find out more about our guest, and if we're lucky, we might get to see some hairless cats in sweaters. Joining us today from across the coast in Pittsburgh, welcome to the show, Molly Girard. Welcome, Molly. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. One thing that I forgot to bring it up, but tell me if that's right. Do I got your Instagram right down there?
Yeah, you do.
Whoop, whoop. All right. Did a little bit of research beforehand and forgot to ask you about it before we started. But welcome again. Thank you so much. Tell me a little bit about yourself, about your journey thus far. You are a therapist and you do art therapy more specifically. Tell me a little bit about everything that's led you up to that.
Yeah, sure. So I started out as like a fine arts major, painting in Savannah, Georgia, and I loved it. But after a year, I was like, I will forever be broke. So this is not feasible long term. And I had always also been interested in like psychology and therapy. So I kind of turned that into looking into art therapy. Mm-hmm. So I ended up majoring in behavioral health and addictions counseling, minored in fine art, and then got my master's in art therapy with a concentration in counseling.
Nice. Very cool. So how is it different? I mean, I haven't been to any kind of therapy or counseling or anything like that since I was a little kid. Like I had a lot of anger issues as a kid. So, mom and dad made me go to the therapist and I don't remember what kind of pills they gave me. One was orange, one was green. And Apparently that worked. I don't know. I'm better now. But, I made an appointment actually for a couple of weeks from now to start with a therapist. And for me, it's just going to be talking. But what is different about art therapy? Like, how is it so much of a different communication style? What do you get from that you might not get from just talking to a person?
Yeah, so there are some different pieces with art therapy. There's art as therapy, which you can do anytime from like your own home. That's kind of like anyone who does art in their free time, quilting, writing, knitting, even. Just the idea that being able to like express yourself in a creative way can be cathartic and help just like release emotions and kind of give you like some space to be expressive. But then there's this idea also that with art therapy and bringing art into like a therapeutic practice and with different modalities, that there are different symbols, like metaphors, symbolism, and like ways to process trauma and emotions and past experiences through art expression and art directives that can sort of create a nice middle ground, especially for people that are uncomfortable talking about certain things like you would in a normal talk therapy session.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned symbols or symbolism in art. Is it like, I mean, I think of cartoons or shows that I've seen where like one kid is drawing people with their arms cut off and blood spurting everywhere or whatever. And like all of a sudden the teacher's like, oh my God, what's going on? Like, that's kind of an extreme, over dramatic case, but what are some more like applicable things that you see, when somebody is expressing themselves through art in your practice?
Yeah. So I think there are different things. I always try to remain curious. Like I don't try to like make assumptions like just because it's red, you have to be angry. But I'll definitely like invite that in through curiosity and say like, I'm noticing that like there's a lot of really like aggressive like brush strokes, or like I'm noticing like these really different shapes or pops of color, or the way you're like, this figure maybe is like off by themselves to the side, like separated from the other things that you made. And I'll kind of ask and like bring out like curiosity to invite them to like either explore what the meaning might mean for them, explore any connections that maybe relate to what we've been talking about, whether that's like family history, trauma, current relationships, like their own mental health on just like a day-to-day basis. And I mean, some of it is kind of stereotypical. I would be super concerned if someone like drew figures with like arms cut off and blood spurting everywhere. We would probably do some like self-harm assessment. But yeah, I mean, there's different forms of symbolism that I think can also be really personal for different people.
Got it. Very cool. I'm just learning here. Also coming from a place of curiosity. I'll be the first one to say it, and I love to say it. I don't know stuff. Like, I'm just a big fat dummy. I don't know nothing. So, I ask all kinds of questions because I just never know, what the answers might be. You have been working at this for a few years now. And one of the things that you wanted to make sure to focus on from the research that I did, you want to make sure that you're open to and affirming of polyamorous folks. Tell me a little bit about your experience with the polyamorous community and why it's important for you to be open and accepting of that.
Yeah, for sure. So I myself am not polyamorous in like my personal life. But I have some really good friends and people that I would consider like my chosen family who definitely practice polyamory and practice like open relationships. And so by default, like their partners kind of become part of my circle as well. And, I've definitely made it a point like through having relationships and like people in my life who are polyamorous to want to be as affirming as possible. And I've also found that as a member of like the LGBTQ community, as someone who identifies as a kinky person, there's a lot of overlap. Most of my clients who maybe identify as queer or are like a kinky person, there almost is always some overlap I found with people who also are in open relationships or exploring and practicing polyamory with their partners. So I find that it all really kind of intertwines a lot.
I love that. I love the idea, always going back to that chosen family. Now, as you have kind of been um, learning all of these things, because this is all like in the past 4 years, I think it was that you got that you graduated and started practicing for therapy.
About that, yeah. I graduated. It'll be a year since I got my master's in May, but I've kind of always been working on the side and like kind
Nice.
of doing like practical work even through school. So I've been working with clients probably since like 2016.
Nice, nice. Do you find that like even at home that you're like doing the analyzing people and like all these different things?
Sometimes my partner always is like, don't therapize me. Like, let me just like have a conversation with you. Like, don't bring your work home. And I'm like, all right, I'll try. I make
It's worse. It's so much worse.
And you know, like I wanted to kind of get into that, like with your polyamorous friends. You know, these are part of your chosen family. These are people that you spend time with. These are people that you know you see it a lot because those communities all do overlap quite a bit. What types of things have you learned that you like adapt? Like, is there it's kind of that's like a really broad question. So let me see if I can kind of narrow it down a little bit more. Have there been any instances, any things that you see that are specifically like polyam problems, right?
Mhm.
Like a partner's partner is doing this, that, or the other. And how do you bring the things that you've learned in your therapy practice and adapt them to a polyamorous situation?
Yeah. So I think what I've learned from my chosen family and from like their various partners and the different relationships that they've had over the years, I think it comes down to, as like I kind of stated when we were originally kind of messaging, communication, especially in the beginning stages where like I've had friends kind of just dipping their toes into opening up their marriage or their relationship, or like dipping their toes into, I feel like I'm a polyamorous person. What does that look like? And how do I like sit down with my primary partner or with other people that I'm in a relationship with? And how do we like discuss boundaries and like our terms of agreement and like what we're all comfortable with, especially bringing new people into like our relationship dynamic. And I feel like that comes up, I mean, a lot in therapy in general, because it is about communication, but a lot of couples I work with who maybe are exploring like polyamorous dynamics or opening up their marriage or are already in a polyamorous dynamic and are coming to me because maybe they're hitting like a communication rut. I feel like it all sort of like my first question is always like, okay, like what are the boundaries? Like, did we discuss like what everyone's comfortable with? Like, what are the hard limits? What are negotiable? And I think that also comes from me being a kinky person as well. So like
Same kind of thing.
negotiation, yeah, there's a lot that goes with communication and being like super clear and upfront from the get-go so that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, a lot of people definitely skip that part. I know in my own situation, we didn't necessarily talk a lot about boundaries. We kind of figured them out as we go along. What are some common boundaries? My girlfriend actually has a list. One of these days, I'm going to ask her if I can see it. She's listening either now or she's going to listen later, so she knows. But one of these days, like I want to see like what's your boundary list? Do you recommend people that actually like write these things out, and what are some suggested boundaries?
Mm-hmm. I'm personally a fan for writing things out just because I like seeing things in front of me. So I'm always a fan for that, but it doesn't work for everyone and that's totally fine. I just think even the idea of like everyone sitting down and having like a super open conversation from the beginning, or even as bumps come up, like, okay, like we're hitting some tension, like where is this coming from? I think boundaries for a lot of people in polyamorous relationships kind of circle around like time spent and what does that look like? Like splitting time equally between partners, like making sure everyone feels like there's open communication and that one person isn't feeling like left out of a dynamic or is, you know, spending less time with people or like a certain partner than maybe the other people. And I think that comes with just even being an adult and having any relationship, like navigating work schedules, navigating life, like navigating how to be intimate and like the craziness of day-to-day life too. So when you add multiple partners, there's going to be multiple layers of communication to work through.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
We're going places for sure. So time management is definitely a big one, making sure that that we are spending time with our different partners or discovering, making boundaries of what time we want even to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other boundaries? What are some other like suggested things? Like what other things should somebody new be looking at around their boundaries? Any other suggestions, like sex, maybe like what type of sex or whatever? What other kind of stuff that should we be talking about when we're having the boundary conversation?
I mean, sex is always important. I think if you're having the boundary conversation, it doesn't even have to be like if you're kinky or not kinky. I think the idea of like, what does sex mean for each partner? Like, how often do they want to be sexually intimate with someone? Is there something that they like are comfortable engaging in or is really important for them with their sex practice versus someone who maybe is like, that's a hard limit for me. Like, I don't do that. That's kind of triggering for me or it's traumatizing. Like, I can't give you that. And then if, once you bring in other people and it becomes a multi-person dynamic outside of just a partnership, how is like safety considered even? Like, what are safe sex practices when there's multiple people involved? What does that look like between different people wanting to have different sexual dynamics within their relationship? I think those are always really important to talk about. And I also always suggest people, like, as ridiculous as this may sound, I'm like, have like a kitchen table meeting, like once a month, once every 2 or 3 weeks. You sit down and just check in, because that way, if someone is frustrated, if there's like tension building, like why don't we try to like address it before it gets to a point where it like blows up and we're like, where did this come from?
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you're referring to this specifically, but that makes me think of the radar that the folks over at the Multiamory podcast, that's what they recommend is a radar. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Depending on the relationship, if it's a newer one, maybe it's like every couple of weeks, or if it's, even an older relationship that kind of needs a more check-in times, maybe it's every 2 weeks or every month or whatever, but it creates that safe space where we have the opportunity to have those tough conversations. It doesn't feel like an attack coming out of nowhere. The other point that I wanted to kind of discuss here, since we're talking about boundaries, is that boundaries are always about what I'm willing to accept for myself, boundaries that I make for myself, as opposed to rules that we would place on another person. So just kind of, could you explain in your words, because I know what my definition is, but could you explain in your words the difference between rules and boundaries?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I feel like a boundary is negotiable to an extent. Like, if I have a couple that's maybe talking about opening up their marriage into like a polyamorous dynamic and they're like not sure where to start, I always tell them that, boundaries can be renegotiated. We can start at one place and in a couple months, like we want to bring something up and say like, hey, I know we set this boundary, but I kind of want to look at it from a different perspective. Like I want to like negotiate this. I think boundaries are coming from a point of safety and communication and can always be negotiated, with consent, obviously. I find rules to be more like a hard and fast. And I think that kind of goes with the idea that like everything should have consent behind it, honesty, being super upfront, because obviously when you take the communication and the ethical part out of, if you take the ethical part out of ethical non-monogamy, it's just having an affair, which is
right.
what polyamory is. And I feel like rules tend to center around those really hard and fast, like what is like straight unacceptable.
Got it. So for you, it's more like something that's negotiable, that has kind of some room to move, and that's okay. All right. That's a little bit different than a lot of the definitions that I've seen. At least, when I've when I've done, any kind of research, the boundary is a person that is something that, like I said, I would set for myself. So like my boundary is I'm not going to have sex with somebody who has unprotected sex with multiple people. Right. Whereas a rule is telling somebody you're not allowed to do that. So,
yeah,
but I like your definition because it gives a little bit of leeway for the relationships to adjust as they grow.
And I think you do bring up a good point about rules. I think I guess the only reason I didn't take it from that perspective originally is I feel like telling someone what they're not allowed to do, I don't know, I'm cautious about that because I always feel like relationships are about that communication and that compromise. So I feel like it can be a really slippery slope, at least from what I've seen in all couples therapy, even when someone's like, you are not allowed to do this. I'm always like, let's this a little more. Let's discuss this for a minute.
I remember having a conversation like that. Oh, all these years ago, it was like I had I felt like I was addicted to weed, right? Before I joined the Navy. And then I joined the Navy and I didn't touch it for 8 years. But then I get out of the Navy and I tried it out a little bit and it was okay, but then I would sometimes not have a good experience. And so so then my wife goes and this is back in when California actually needed the medical cards. And she wanted to kind of start smoking, and she was like, all right, well, I'm gonna start. And I'm like, no, don't do this, don't start, don't. And she's like, oh, are you trying to tell me what to do? She goes,
I ignored my destiny once.
She goes, she gets the card, she comes home with a bunch, and I'm like, ah, dang it. And it is what it is. Try and tell
me. I'll do it myself.
Try and tell people what to do. It's just not gonna work. So tell me a little bit more about your practice, your growth, some of the more meaningful things that you've learned about polyamorous relationships. There's we have nuances, right? There are specific things that we do differently from everybody else. And I kind of want to dig into in your practice, especially if you're practicing through art. How does that how do you get a polyamorous feel through art? What kind of art? What does it tell you?
I think it really depends on, what the client, or if it's multiple clients, coming in as a couple or a dynamic in a group, what they're here for. Cause I feel like everyone's story is going to kind of come through in the art. And what they're looking for is going to come through in the art. So if I'm, working with a couple or working with someone who individually who's even within a poly dynamic, and we're talking about maybe communication issues, and we're doing some art surrounding that. I find that and maybe this is just because I do a lot of family systems work too. I find that a lot of pieces kind of come in from what they grew up seeing, what did relationships look like to you when you were growing up? What did it mean to be in a family? What did communication mean in a committed relationship? Or did you not see that growing up? Were you raised by a single parent? Or did you bounce around between multiple homes, or have different caretakers? I think all of these things come together and impact the way we view relationships and how we interact with our relationships with primary partners, with multiple partners, single. And then I think that kind of all manifests in the different relationships we have. So I find that with a lot of my clients, it's a lot of okay, so what messages did you receive about communication and about relationships growing up? What were past relationships like for you, and what did those look like? And I think that comes out a lot through the art, and we can talk a lot about those things, especially if there was maybe some trauma involved.
I love it. Have you seen things change, especially in the past year that we've all been so isolated? What is? I mean, you laugh, but there's so much more of a need now for mental health services. What are you seeing out there? The way that things have changed for you.
We were on a break!
Took a 12-month break.
Right? Seriously. I think that people are more open to mental health services. I can't tell you the number of people that when I have my first session with them, they're like, I didn't think I needed therapy or I wanted mental health services, but I literally have been like sitting at home for a year and I've had like all this time to think about things and to process things. And suddenly I'm struggling to communicate with my partner or partners, or I'm having memories from when I was younger that are impacting my relationships and are impacting my mental health. So I feel like being forced to sit still for a lot of people has kind of pushed them to be like, oh, damn, there's more that I want to like focus on than I realize, or more is like coming up for me than I realize because I'm not running everywhere doing things right now.
Yeah. Do you feel I'm curious about like how the process works. If you start talking to a client, like, do you just automatically have them like sit down and draw a picture, or do you talk to them first? Like, how does the process go?
It kind of depends on what they're looking for. I always tell people that, I like to go at their pace and kind of take their lead on things. I might make suggestions or like be curious about things. Like, I wonder what would happen if, we took some time to make some art exploring XYZ, like what this feels like for you, what this looks like for you. But I have some clients that come to me and are like, I have some trauma that I'm working on. I'd love to do art, but I'm not ready right now. And so like, I'm like, okay, we'll take it at your pace. Like, I'll follow your lead. When you're ready, we'll talk about it. Or I even have some people that kind of dip in and out. We'll talk about stuff for a while and just do like straight talk therapy. And then if something kind of important or meaningful seems to come up, I might invite and say like, hey, like between now and next session, if you're open to it, maybe sit down, take some time to make some art or explore XYZ. And then like next session, we'll sit and we'll talk about it and we'll see like what came up for you. If anything, if nothing, no big deal.
And what do you direct them on, like what kind of art that they should be drawing? Like, I don't know if they're having problems with one of their partners or multiple partners. Is it like draw a picture of how you feel about your partners, or like do you give them instructions on what to draw or how to express themselves in art?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes if people have been making like already identify as being artistic people and they're like, oh, I do art all the time, like I got this, I'll be like, okay, cool, like I'll follow your lead. I think for some people that are really interested in art therapy but have never really done or experienced art before, or they're like, I haven't done art since I was in like grade school, I might suggest things. I might suggest or like offer ideas of like, well, I wonder what it would be like for you to make art about what you wish things had looked like, or how things could be different, or if you could go back to like this period of time when this trauma happened, like what do you wish like your adult self could do for your child self, or what do you wish communication looked like right now between you and your partners, like what dynamics are like coming up for you. And I'll kind of like see what they're feeling, and usually my clients are pretty open with me. Like if I suggest something and they're like, I don't know if this is touching on what I want to touch on, I'll be like, okay, cool. So let's talk about it. Like, what do you feel like you're needing from the art? Like, what do you need right now to feel like you're getting what you want to process things?
Nice. So it's not a show up and draw me a picture and we're going to talk about what you drew. It's like, let's have conversations. Let's, really have like that talk therapy, but those monumental moments, those big ideas, those big instances, those big events, that's where you're like, okay, we want to get in a little bit deeper by expressing through art.
I believed in you for a long time, okay?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's also about when people are ready. I've had some clients where we'll just start off and I'm like, make a self-portrait. I'm like, make a collage about stuff that you think I should know about you. Like what's important, what's not important. Or, if they're really struggling and they're not ready to talk, we might sit down pre-COVID times. We might sit down in the same room and like make art together and just sort of like and like share the space, and like when they're ready, usually people will come and they'll like open up and they'll talk when they're safe. And it's about like providing that safe space until they feel comfortable.
Nice. So you will actually sit down and work on some art right alongside them to kind of give them that courage, help them through it. That's cool.
Yeah, it's harder in COVID. I'll admit that. Telehealth art therapy is a weird challenge. It's a lot easier when you're in the same space.
I just want to know, like, what are those challenges? Tell me a little bit more about what you've seen through telehealth art therapy.
I set a lot more like homework for my clients, which sounds so bad, but it's true. Because it's so much harder to like ignore my cat.
That wasn't a hairless one.
No, it wasn't. It's so much harder to be able to be in the space and like watch someone make art through a camera, because like the art's in front of them, they're usually looking down. It's like hard to see the process. So what I'll usually invite people to do, younger kids are a little different, but usually with like adults and like teenagers, I'll invite them like in between session, like to make art. And usually we'll talk about maybe like what that prompt looks like, or what that directive might look like. And then they'll like usually email me or text me pictures. So then when we kind of meet up again, like I have a copy on my end, they have a copy on their end, and we can both kind of look at it. Because if I'm in person, I usually sit right next to them or with them. So we're looking at the art at the same time and from the same perspective, and like we'll process it together in the space.
What about digital art?
I love digital art. I personally am not a digital artist. I have so much respect for people who are, but I have some clients that love doing digital art, and they'll send me, the PDFs, or if we were in person pre-COVID, they would bring their laptop or their tablet with them and be like, hey, like I made this week, like, can we sit down and look at this? And we'd like sit and look at their laptop or their tablet, and we'd like kind of process what was going on with it. I think it's another way to like really get some cool creativity out there, and it's super portable, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. So it doesn't have to be paintbrush to paper necessarily. It can be a digital thing. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Very cool. Well, Molly, thank you again for spending some time with us. I want to give you an opportunity for anybody who's listening. Okay, we have our listening audience checking out the podcast. What is the best way for somebody to get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, for sure. So you're welcome to DM me through my Instagram, or I answer my email. So it's my last name, which you can see on my tag. So girard.therapy@gmail.com.
All right, perfect. So there's that email. And then for those following on Instagram, it's splatter_paint_therapy_. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Molly. It's been such a pleasure to learn from you, and learned a little bit about art therapy today. I like it.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
I wasn't aware that was something a person could do.
There's another kind of art right there.
Yes.
Some musicals. I love it. Here we go. Great conversation from Elle. Thank you. Great conversation. I resonate with. I didn't know I needed therapy. That was me a year and a half ago. And so many others out there, myself being one of them. I really did. I signed up for a therapy session in a couple of weeks, and I haven't done it in forever. So thank you, Molly, for giving us that space to say, hey, it's okay if we didn't know. Now we know.
No problem.
And as I was about to say, thank you also to our live audience for tuning in. As a reminder, when we're live, you get no commercial interruptions, but the same cannot be said for our podcast download. So if you want to avoid those commercial interruptions, be sure to catch us Monday through Wednesday at 2:30 Pacific time, or sign up for our Patreon, where you'll get access to our commercial-free RSS feed and support the show. Don't forget to head over to bondingproject.com between now and Friday, so you'll know what Dr. Eli Sheff and I are talking about. And subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Thanks again, as always, for hanging out. And thank you again, Molly. Everybody else, it's Wednesday. It's beautiful out. At least if you're in San Diego. So go out there.
Have a nice day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Practicing Polyamory podcast. Would you or someone in your polycule like to be a guest? Sign up at practicingpolyamory.com and join the conversation. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and following us on social media at Practicing Polya by clicking any of the affiliate links on our website or by subscribing at Patreon.